When you think of the great American generals of World War II, names like Eisenhower and Bradley probably pop into your head. They were the architects of victory, respected by everyone, including the German high command. But there's a world of difference between respect and fear. On the battlefield, fear is a weapon all its own, and some American commanders wielded it a lot better than others. In post-war interviews and memoirs, German officers gave their impressions of the American commanders they faced. It's not a simple top 5 most feared list because they respected and worried about different generals for very different reasons. Some weren't even on the front lines. These were the men whose presence on a map, whether in person or by reputation, could make German planners rethink their entire strategy. This is a look at 5 American generals who, in their own unique way, got into the heads of the Third Reich. First up is a general who made his mark not with a complex maneuver, but with a single, defiant word. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st Airborne during the Battle of the Bulge, represents a specific kind of threat: the fear of the unbreakable. In December 1944, Hitler's last big offensive slammed into the Ardennes. The key to the whole German plan was the vital crossroads town of Bastogne. Defending it were the men of the 101st Airborne, who had been rushed in to hold the line. It wasn't long before they were totally surrounded, outnumbered, low on ammo, and freezing in the bitter cold. From the German perspective, the situation was textbook. The trapped Americans had 2 choices: surrender or be annihilated. On December 22nd, German officers under a white flag delivered an ultimatum from General von Lüttwitz, demanding the honorable surrender of the town to prevent its total annihilation. When the message reached a sleep-deprived McAuliffe, his immediate reaction was nuts. After kicking it around with his staff, they decided his first response was the best one. A formal message was typed up and sent back to the baffled Germans. It contained one word: nuts. The German officers had no idea what to make of it. "Is that a negative or an affirmative reply?" the German major asked. Colonel Joseph Harper, who delivered the note, spelled it out for them. "The reply is decidedly not affirmative," he explained, adding that if they kept attacking, "we will kill every goddamn German that tries to break into this city." In plain English, he told them it meant go to hell. This kind of raw defiance flew in the face of military logic. The 101st was surrounded and weak. They were supposed to break. This one-word reply signaled that the Americans weren't going to play by the book. While the situation in Bastogne was grim, the Germans didn't know that Patton's Third Army was already maneuvering to break the encirclement. But on the ground, McAuliffe's famous response electrified his troops. He showed a psychological grit that the Germans were finding harder and harder to beat. He represented an American spirit of defiance that just wouldn't be broken, no matter the odds. This next general almost never visited the front lines, but he haunted the German high command in a totally different way. General of the Army George C. Marshall, the Army Chief of Staff, inspired the fear of the inevitable. He was the master organizer of the American war machine, the logistical genius who turned the U.S. into an arsenal so vast that it slowly and inexorably crushed the Third Reich. The German leadership, which idolized battlefield tactics, consistently underestimated logistics. Hitler himself dismissed America as a nation of consumers, not warriors. What they failed to grasp was that this material abundance wasn't just a fact of life, it was a strategy, and it was orchestrated by men like George C. Marshall. Appointed Chief of Staff on the day Hitler invaded Poland, Marshall inherited an army that was, by some estimates, ranked 17th in the world, smaller than even Portugal's. Over the next few years, he oversaw the greatest military expansion in history, transforming the armed forces into an 8 million strong global military force. Marshall was instrumental in finding the recruits, building the camps, picking the commanders and, most importantly, supplying them with a seemingly endless river of tanks, planes, and guns. Of course, he didn't do it alone. It was a massive national effort involving the entire government and American industry. Still, German generals on the front lines felt the weight of his work. They'd win a tactical victory, only to find that for every American tank they destroyed, it felt like two more appeared on the horizon. This ability to absorb losses and just keep coming was soul-crushing. German officers often complained in post-war interviews about being defeated by sheer material superiority. This wasn't the heroic clash of warriors they understood. It was a war against a factory, an assembly line that stretched 3,000 miles across an ocean. The fear of Marshall wasn't of a man, but of a machine he had organized, and one that would inevitably grind them into dust. Next, we have a man who was the complete opposite of the flashy, headline-grabbing general. Omar Bradley was known as the GI's general for his quiet, unpretentious style and his concern for his soldiers. But to the German army, this calm, professor-like figure was the face of a new kind of American warfare, methodical, relentless, and absolutely overwhelming. If McAuliffe represented an unbreakable spirit and Marshall an unstoppable machine, Bradley was the master of the inevitable checkmate. He wasn't a gambler. As commander of the 1st U.S. Army for D-Day, and later the 12th Army Group, the largest American field command in history, he wielded America's immense power with terrifying precision. Where another general might look for a high-risk breakthrough, Bradley would systematically gather his forces, leverage overwhelming artillery and air power, and then just grind his opponents into submission. His planning was central to Operation Cobra, which used thousands of heavy bombers to carpet bomb a narrow slice of the German lines, literally blasting a hole for his armies to pour through. This led to the encirclement at Falaise, where the German 5th Panzer Army and 7th Army suffered catastrophic losses that crippled their ability to fight in France. The Germans saw Bradley as the systematic breaker of their defenses. His forces might get bogged down in brutal, costly fights like the Hürtgen Forest, but they never, ever stopped. While some German commanders later dismissed his style as plotting, they couldn't argue with its effectiveness. Bradley's brand of warfare created the dread of knowing you were facing an enemy who had more of everything and would just keep coming until you were annihilated. He was the quiet professional who would take you apart, piece by bloody piece. Our next general is the man at the very top, the Supreme Allied Commander, Dwight D. Eisenhower. The German High Command didn't fear Ike as a tactical opponent on the battlefield. The fear he inspired was bigger, more strategic, and ultimately more corrosive to their entire war effort. It was the fear of being beaten by a coalition that was learning, adapting, and held together by one man's will. At first, the Germans didn't think much of him. After American forces stumbled badly in North Africa at Kesselring Pass, their opinion of Allied leadership was pretty low. But it was Ike's response that planted the first seeds of doubt. Instead of denial, he learned. He immediately fired the failing commander and replaced him with a far more aggressive one. He restructured his command, improved air-ground coordination, and absorbed the lessons of defeat. This ability to learn and adapt at a strategic level impressed German observers, including those close to Rommel. As the war went on, the Germans came to respect Eisenhower as the man orchestrating their defeat. He was the one playing the entire board, from Sicily to the Rhine. He was the one who greenlit Operation Overlord, the largest amphibious invasion in history, and made the tough call to launch on D-Day despite dangerously uncertain weather. He held the fractious Allied coalition together through political skill and sheer force of personality. When the Germans launched the Battle of the Bulge, they were betting they could shatter that coalition. Eisenhower, however, held it firm, calmly organizing the response that crushed their final offensive. In the end, German generals understood that while they might outfight a single American division, they couldn't outmaneuver the entire Allied war effort. Ike was the thinking mind of that effort, a mind that had proven it could leverage overwhelming strength and relentlessly drive toward one goal: the total and unconditional surrender of the Third Reich. And that brings us to the one general whose name is still synonymous with American aggression. He's the commander the Germans saw as a dark reflection of their own blitzkrieg philosophy, General George S. Patton, Jr. Patton was a tactical terror. He was so aggressive and so successful that the Allies famously built their main D-Day deception plan, Operation Fortitude, around him. They knew the Germans considered him one of their most dangerous opponents and would find it plausible that he'd lead the main invasion force. Patton's reputation was forged in North Africa. After the American defeat at Kesselring Pass, Eisenhower sent him to take over the battered U.S. Torjou. He arrived like a force of nature, demanding strict discipline and a ferocious commitment to killing the enemy. The change was immediate. Under Patton, the Détachement Corps became a key part of the larger Allied effort that ultimately pushed the Axis out of Africa. What really got into the Germans' heads was that Patton fought like they did. He embraced a war of speed and violence, seeing tanks as modern cavalry for deep, brutal attacks to collapse the enemy from behind. His philosophy was simple: always take the offensive, never dig in. This earned him a grudging respect from his adversaries. He was often compared to their own Heinz Guderian, the architect of the Blitzkrieg. Patton's famous race across France in 1944 was a German nightmare. After the breakout from Normandy, his Third Army roared across the countryside, sometimes covering 100 miles in 2 weeks, smashing through defenses and creating chaos. This was Blitzkrieg turned against its inventors. The speed and ferocity of his advance was something they understood, respected, and absolutely dreaded. While strategic planners in Berlin may have been worried about Eisenhower, the German soldier in a foxhole was worried about Patton. From the unbreakable defiance of Anthony McAuliffe to the industrial might organized by George Marshall, from the methodical pressure of Omar Bradley to the grand strategic vision of Dwight Eisenhower, and finally to the pure, terrifying aggression of George Patton. These 5 men, in their own ways, represented the multifaceted threat the American military posed to the German war machine. They weren't just names on a list. They were symbols of different kinds of power. Together, they proved that the American military wasn't the soft, disorganized force Nazi propaganda claimed it was. It was a force that could learn, adapt, and produce leaders who could beat the Wehrmacht at its own game. They didn't just win battles, they broke the will of their opponents, proving that in the psychological war for Europe, they were the ultimate victors. Who do you think was the most effective American general of the war? Was it one of these 5 or someone else entirely? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this look into the psychology of World War II, be sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into military history.